I'm Rabbi Tobin at B'nai Shalom in West Orange, New Jersey. We're continuing the third chapter of Sanhedrin, Zeborer, and if you're following in the art scroll Schottenstein, that's where much of the commentary that the class has in front of them is following. So we're on page 24a3, the second Mishnah of the chapter. Okay, so we escaped the first Mishnah, but not the topic, because we still have a debate going on between Rabbi Meir and the sages that has to do with two sets of witnesses or the judges who are adjudicating your case. So the background is this. You owe me $50. You deny that you owe me $50. So it's dinei mamonot. It's money cases. And I'm bringing you before a beit din. According to the first Mishnah, the dispute between Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim is that Rabbi Meir seems to give you certain circumstances where you can invalidate the other person's witnesses. And there's also a system by which I pick one judge, you pick one judge, and the two judges pick the third judge. And we can disqualify one or the other of the judges. So the question is, can the plaintiff or the defendant invalidate the witnesses of the other party on some basis? You know, I know that they couldn't be testifying for you because they were robbing a bank with me that day, you know, and all kinds of convoluted systems where I'm not allowed to testify because I'm involved in their thing, or and they basically settled on the idea that you can only invalidate people for two reasons. One, they are involved in the case, they're a family member or something like that, or two, they are unfit for testimony. They are pasul le'edut. So either something in their lineage, they're like a descendant of a Canaanite slave, which is this category the rabbis were worried about, or they're a thief. There's somebody who's an unbelievable person and is not allowed to give testimony in general. That kind of stuff. And they had a lot of different arguments about what Rabbi Meir and the sages were fighting about. It wasn't entirely clear. Were they fighting about a case where there was another set of witnesses, so I can invalidate your witnesses, but only in a case where there's other witnesses who can still prove the case? Or can I invalidate witnesses when I will walk away scot-free? They also linked the two a little bit, where invalidating a judge means you don't have a beit din. Are you going to allow that to happen when the witnesses are kosher? You have a real case. Something has happened. So if you throw the beit din out, it has to be when you have other beit dins you can go to. But if you throw the witnesses out, you don't have a case anymore. So it doesn't matter if the beit din itself is valid. And they argued about that as well. So now we're going to back off a little bit, and we're going to get back into it in another context. So the Mishnah on 24a3 goes like this. Ne'eman alai Abba. Amar lo ne'eman alai Abba. So he said to him, one of the people involved in the case says to his opponent, that a father is acceptable to me. Ne'eman alai avicha. Or your father is acceptable to me. Ne'emanim alai shlosha ro'e vakar. Or, you know what, I'm going to accept these three shepherds, and they'll be acceptable to me. Cattle herders will be acceptable to me. And in that scenario, Rabbi Meir says, Rabbi Meir Omer, Yachol Achzor. The person who said, I'm going to accept these people to be involved in adjudicating the case as witnesses or judges, who are normally not allowed to be witnesses or judges, but I'm going to make an exemption so that we can actually go to trial. The question is, Rabbi Meir says, Yachol Achzor bo, he can later revoke that permission. So he doesn't lose his right to revoke the permission to use these people in the case. V'chachamim amrim, eino yachol lachazor bo. But the sages say once he's given that permission, he cannot retract it. So why would you retract it? Like, what's the realia underneath this Mishnah? I allow witnesses or judges into the court who I don't have to, and what happens? They rule against me. And then I say, you know what? It doesn't count. On appeal, I'm going to say they are not kosher witnesses. Their testimony needs to be struck down, and so can you hedge your bets? Can you say I'm going to let it go forward and see if I win, and then retract if I lose? Would Rabbi Meir really be saying that?
But what about the other person?
What about the other person?
Don't both parties have to agree to who can be witnesses?
Sure. I mean, my presumption is that, the presumption is that one of the guys has people who are presumed to be biased in his favor, and the other guy sees that bias, but is going to allow it anyways. Now, that presumes that my father is going to help me out. My father might know me better than everyone else and realize that I'm a liar and a cheat, and he's going to testify against me in a heartbeat, right? So I might say, I'm going to let my dad testify, thinking it's good, and then my dad stands up there and throws me under the bus, right? And then I'm going to say, wait a minute, So it could be either way. But yes, they all have to agree. Once they agree, you can't reverse according to Chachamim. You can with Rabbi Meir, but we don't know the scenario. We don't know if it's before the case has been adjudicated or after the case has been adjudicated. We don't know if there's another potential Beit Din to go to. We don't know if there's another set of witnesses to go to. Right? All those things that were dealt with in the beginning of this chapter would still be in play logically here for this Mishnah as well. Okay, and then it goes on. That's the Reisha of the Mishnah. That's the first half of the Mishnah. There's a Seifa to the Mishnah, and that language is important because the Gemara, the Talmud, in this next section, between this Mishnah and the next Mishnah, is going to refer to the Reisha and the Seifa when it does some of its analysis. So in the Reisha, it's Abba. Meir says you can Yachzor, and the sages say Lo Yachzor. In the Seifa, Haya Chayav L'Chavero Shavua, you were obligated to the other litigant, the other participant in the case, to swear an oath, and we'll talk about that in a second. Ve'amar lo, and he said to him, Dorli b'chayei roshecha, swear to me by the life of your head. Rabbi Meir omer yachol lachazor bo. Rabbi Meir says he can reverse himself. V'chachamim omrim ein yachol lachazor. The sages say he can't retract. So the common theme between the Reisha and the Seifa is something's happening in court that is not necessary. It's an option that they've chosen. Rabbi Meir says since it was an option, in both of these cases you can retract. And the sages say it's an option you've chosen, and once you've chosen the options, you may not retract. Yeah, because he's going to come back. He's going to pick up a box. And then he's going to come bouncing back down the hallway again with that same cart. Thank you. All right, everyone good so far? So in the case of permitting my father or your father, that's pretty straightforward. The second case, however, where he says somebody is obligated to make an oath, and then the oath he chooses to impose on him is by the life of your head, that requires a little bit of explaining. So in a court case in rabbinic law, there are two times that a person might have to swear an oath. Basically, you don't have enough proof to adjudicate the case, and so there is an oath sworn by one of the parties to terminate the case. Now, the oath either is an oath that you swear that obligates you in some way, or it's an oath that you swear that exempts you from some way. So if the defendant swears that he doesn't owe the money, then the oath carries that he doesn't owe the money. Why does that work? Because there's not enough proof to prove it. And if he's guilty of perjury of an oath, it's a death penalty offense, taking God's name in vain. So he's basically getting away not having to pay the $50, but he's putting his life at risk. And so he's believable. Yeah.
There's not enough proof on either side.
Right. They can't prove the case.
Okay.
They can't prove or disprove.
They can't prove or disprove. So the defendant swears an oath, and he walks away not having to pay. However, the oath has placed this threat over him, which makes it okay from the point of view of justice, because how could he possibly swear an oath in the case of $50? Nobody would do that, right? So the oath has this kind of power. You also have the oath on the other side that if it's the obligating party, the person who is going, you can swear an oath where you have to fulfill the terms of the contract, right? And that's another kind of an oath. they're not going to get into that too much, so we don't need to wander down that rabbit hole. What happens here, however, is in the phrasing, rather than swearing by the name of God, he has him swear by the life of his own head, which is a lesser oath. If I swear by my life that I don't owe you $50, and I'm lying, no death penalty offense. I didn't invoke God's name, right? So this is a situation where they have agreed to a lesser oath, because why would you make somebody for $50 put their life at risk? I mean, ultimately for $50, what if I know I'm right, and he believes he's right, but I know he's wrong? Why would I let him take that oath? I only want $50. I don't want him killed, right? So I'm going to say, take a different oath, please. And I agree to that secondary oath. The question is, later on, when I still don't get my $50, can I retract my permissive stance and require the more stringent ruling? See what's happening? So it's like I accepted your father into the court, which is very permissive on my part, but then later I might not like the outcome. Can I retract? I've accepted a lesser oath, which is permissive on my part, but if I don't like the outcome, maybe I'll retract and use the full weight of the law, right? It's kind of like, an analogy lahavdil, the Mueller investigation is going on, right? So you have the former campaign chair who made a deal, right? And the prosecutors have chosen a permissive stance under certain circumstances to be able to achieve certain goals as far as jurisprudence. Something happens, people don't like the outcome, and they're going to revoke that lenient stance. Right? Basic idea. It's a basic idea. I'm going to revoke the lenient stance. And the threat of revocation is almost as powerful as the letter of the law to begin with. Right? So presumably that makes people honest, unless they're proven to just be not honest people, in which case you don't care and you let the full letter of the law come down on them anyways. So you can understand the kind of natural human behavior in these cases, right? As far as why you would be permissive, but why you might regret that, and why you might want to still have the power of the law behind you. The Chachamim say once you take that permissive stance, you do not have the power of the law behind you anymore. That is the level of the law. You can't go higher than that. You can't reject the father. You can't make him swear the other oath. And Rebbe Meir says, no, you reserve your rights.
Now, in this case you were saying, they all seem to indicate that they're liars.
Well, if you're in court, somebody's lying.
Somebody's lying. I mean, it seems like, it seems like everybody, it's just like, let's think about it. The only thing that they're getting in this court, the only thing that's being prosecuted just about, is that people are lying.
Right.
Not anything to do with the case.
Right. The entire system of civil procedure is based on the concept that people are lying to each other and lying to the court.
And how do you ever figure out?
So in the rabbinic system, you have a really scary, spooky ritual
Which is,
when you put them to the oath before they testify. And they like talk about the punishments that can come to you and the punishments for perjury. And basically, you are quaking in your boots by the time you answer any of the judge's questions.
well, what's the scary thing?
You'll be killed, it's death penalty and this and that, and like all the things. You're here arguing a parking ticket, and they say if you're trying to fool us, you'll be executed, right? I mean, now you're going to change what you say about the parking ticket.
Sure, bring an elephant to kill the flea.
Exactly.
There seems to be also this idea that they're saying is perjury, but it doesn't, I think, hold up to the idea of perjury, is if someone does not know he is saying something that isn't correct, like this idea, I did it in January, if I did it in July, he might not. That was the case.
Might not know.
Yeah, I mean, it's like this guy who's 70 years old and he's trying to figure out, did he get an email or did he not get an email?
Right.
And it's like,
Who said
from
what
2
to
years
do?
ago, it's like 2 years ago, and it's like, and you're gonna throw me in jail now for the rest of my life, because he's 72. And this happened when he was 70. And they're saying, hey, you lied about this. But wait, I gave you all my emails. It isn't like I destroyed them.
Okay.
Okay,
So we're going to do a logic box, because in Talmud there's a lot of logic boxes. Rabbi Meir says with the father, you can yachzor. Is everyone a Hebrew reader or not a Hebrew reader?
Yeah.
Read Yachzor.
Yachzor, can you read that? Yachzor means he can recant, and the sages say lo yachzor, right? That's in the case of the father.
Then you can't recant.
And here again, yachzor and lo yachzor. Doesn't seem like a very complicated logic box, does it?
No, but what's the next part?
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm just waiting for that.
So now let's see what happens with the Gemara. It's a very straightforward case.
One's very liberal and one isn't.
It would seem. So now the Gemara comes in. Rav Amar Rav Dimi, Berei de Rav Nachman, Berei de Rav Yosef. And we saw Dimi before, right? In the first part of the chapter.
Rabbi, what page are we on?
I'm on 24A3,
So that's still there, okay.
and I'm momentarily about to move. I'm right at that gray line in the middle of the page. Rav Nachman, the son of Rav Yosef.
Starting the Gemara.
All right, so what did he say? Kagon de kable ale bechad. It's an instance where the litigant accepted the father upon himself as one. And as your notes here say, one of the three judges. So now we're going to say, what's the case? According to the beginning of the Gemara, and remember, this is the stam of the Gemara. The stam, the anonymous voice of the Gemara, is actually a player in the arguments and will change the scenario whenever he wants. And I say he because the odds of this having been a male is 99.999%. So the stam of the Gemara, whenever he wants to change the playing field, he will change the playing field. He's the editor. So he's going to say, we're going to start with a Rav Dimi tradition, that this Mishnah is about the Abba being one of the three judges in the case. Okay? And we don't know which participant in the case has the Abba right away. Right? We don't know if it's the defendant or the plaintiff.
It's the litigant, I thought it said.
It is a litigant.
It is a litigant, yes.
A litigant is a neutral term, right?
Okay,
A litigant is one of the people involved in the
So
litigation.
we don't know if it's the person who owes money or
We,
lends money.
correct. We know that Rav Meir has said, the first mission of the chapter said Dinei Mamonot. We know it's a monetary case. And Rav Meir is saying, if you say Abba, or my father or your father, you can retract. Just say no. We don't know which person is saying that. And we don't know which person's father that is, necessarily, okay? So maybe it's different. Maybe only the defendant has this ability. Maybe only the plaintiff has this ability. Right? Don't know. So the Gemara, Rav Dimi is already messing with us. Right? All right. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Now we're going to get into an argument between Rav Yehuda and Rav Yochanan under the context of an interpretation of Shmuel. Shmuel is the head of one of the great yeshivot in Babylonia. So we're into core, I'm on 24A4. 24A4,
Okay.
first paragraph of the English. Okay? So we're going to get into an argument of Rav Yehuda and Rav Yochanan about whether or not Rav Dimi is right in his interpretation of the Mishnah. That's just the beginning. Okay?
And Rav Shmuel's role in this is, why say that
He's the great authority that Rav Yehuda is quoting.
okay, that's what I
So,
was
so
trying
Rav Yehuda comes in and he says, the great authority Shmuel said, machloket b'macholecha, that this argument in the Mishnah is about macholecha. Okay, so we're going to go to, according to Rav Yehuda, okay, so this is going to be Rabbi Meir, according to Rav Yehuda. This is going to be I forgive you. Okay? So who's talking? If I'm suing you for $50, and one of the people says, I will accept somebody's father as one of the judges in a case where the person says, if the verdict is such and such, I will forgive you the debt. Who's talking?
The accuser.
Plaintiff.
The accuser, the plaintiff, that's correct. So Rav Yehuda, in the name of Shmuel, says it is the plaintiff. And that in the case of the plaintiff, yachzor, yachzor, lo yachzor, lo yachzor. In the Abba case. So according to Rav Yehuda, in the Abba case, if the plaintiff accepts the Abba, this is what Rav Meir would say, and this is what sages would say. Okay? Aval be'eten lecha, but the person who says, if the ruling is such and such with my father on the court, I will pay you. Who is that?
That's a defendant.
The defendant.
Defendant.
But in the case of a ten lecha, the defendant is the one who permitted a father onto the court. Divrei hakol lo yachzor. Okay? So Rav Yehuda plaintiff, yachzor. But defendant, he says, even Rabbi Meir would say lo yachzor. Okay? So, Rav Dimi said, the Mishnah is about a case where the father is one of the judges. Rav Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, that's true, but the machloket between these two, the argument between them, is only when the plaintiff says, I'll forgive you, if the ruling is against me, not if the defendant is the one who said the father is allowed in. If the plaintiff allowed the father in, there's a machloket. If the defendant allowed the father in, nobody will allow him to retract.
Does it matter whose father it is?
So far, no.
That's my question.
So far, no. They haven't dealt with that. Okay? So Rav Yehuda, quoting Shmuel, to interpret Dimi's casting of the Mishnah, says there's no argument between these two if the defendant allowed the father in. So a defendant who allows the father in, if the ruling is against him, he's going to have to pay. Mayor agrees, Hachamim agree. If the plaintiff says, you know what, I'll forgive you the debt, and then he finds out things are going against him, he can recant so that he is not ruled against by Rabbi Meir. Hachamim don't let him do that. Okay?
I'm surprised they allowed the father anyway.
Well, are you allowed to waive your civil rights in court?
Okay.
Best example is the Miranda warning. Right? You have a right to remain silent.
That's right.
As soon as you talk, you have waived those rights. You have a right to waive your rights, even to your detriment. And the whole enterprise of police investigation is based on making sure those rights were communicated and immediately waived, unconditionally waived, so that they can ask anything they want and use it against you. Right? If they say anything you say can and will be used against you, and then they say, okay, you're not a defendant, we just want to talk to you. Like, which of those two statements are you going to believe?
But you still don't have to answer.
You don't have to. You can stop talking anytime you want.
Because even the plaintiff can be used against
The
him.
thing about our legal system is that the police are allowed to lie to you
Yes.
once you've been arrested and say
A lie,
things that,
mislead.
and misleading lie. It just feels
Correct.
wrong.
And you are not allowed to lie to them.
Right, it's a one-way.
They can lie to you in the investigation to try and get information, and they can know they're lying to try and trip and so forth, and you are not allowed to lie back. Correct. Okay, so in this case, you're allowed to do something that limits your rights, that puts you at a disadvantage in the court. Can anybody come up with an idea why the person who would owe the money cannot wiggle out of it, but the person who's collecting the money can allow it to not be effective? Like the person who owes the money, the defendant, cannot retract allowing a father on. But the person who's trying to collect the money can retract allowing a father on.
Well, the person who's trying to collect is the person who brought the case in the first place.
Okay, so maybe the initiator of the case doesn't have to pursue the case. Whereas the defendant has to answer.
Right.
Maybe.
But I still don't understand why they would allow the father of either of them.
Because they permit it. Who's allowing it? The father is the judge.
Mhm.
I mean, I don't know any judge who's not going to tell you, I am fully competent to adjudicate this case,
It's not
despite
about-
the fact that it's my son.
Right, it's not about competence, it's about having the ethics, about recusing yourself.
I understand. But when you say they, why would they allow him onto the court? You're presuming that there's any oversight to the court. There's not.
Oh, okay.
The court is the court. They are the ones who would have to say they themselves are not eligible. Right?
Excuse me, but there's nothing written in Talmud about recusal?
Nope.
Interesting.
There's nothing that says that where the judge says, I'm involved in the case, I'm not kosher. They can make that claim and have him removed.
And it's not for me about competence and knowledge of the law, it's about the ethic. I mean, I know from being on our licensing board, how many times I recused myself because
Right.
I knew it was being accused of whatever the problem was.
Right.
No, but it is, it's more of knowledge of Torah.
Right.
Because that's what you were saying.
But they're
Right.
still
Makes
ruling.
them,
They are also accountable to God and are considered to be God-fearing people, not, and that kind of thing. But anyways,
Okay.
the category is messy. All right, let's move on. Now, Ibailaho. However, they asked him. So this is Yehuda. Yehuda is in front of the law class, third-year law seminar on disqualifying judges who are related to defendants, right? This is the seminar. And he's quoting Shmuel to recraft Dimi's understanding of this Mishnah, Ibailaho. And they said to him, the people that he's taught this law to, who are also law scholars, right? They say, Be'eten lecha machloket. They say, I'm sorry, I didn't finish Rabbi Yochanan, I'm sorry. So Yehuda said it's in the case of the defendant. And all agree that the defendant may retract his acceptance, right? Aval be'eten lecha, I will give you the money if the court finds for you. Divrei hakol yachol lachzor bo. Did I get that backwards? Hang on. Let's make sure we've got it right. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Machloket b'machol lecha. The person who will forgive, who is the person who is suing him. That's where they disagree. So when it's the plaintiff,
Right. Yeah, that's what you said.
they are arguing. But in the case aval be'eten lecha,
Right.
divrei hakol yachol lachzor bo. I'm sorry. So it goes like this. That's why there's no argument. It's down here. The sages admit that when it's a defendant, he can recant his permission. That makes a lot more sense, because he's the guy who's having money taken out of his pocket.
Right, that makes sense.
Okay, so I'm sorry we had that backwards. Rabbi Yehuda, if it's the plaintiff, yachzor. If it's the defendant, yachzor. According to Rabbi Yehuda, if the sages say if it is the plaintiff, lo yachzor. But if it's the defendant, everybody agrees yachzor. All right, so that's Rabbi Yehuda. Now, in response to that, Rabbi Yochanan Amar, but Rabbi Yochanan comes against Rabbi Yehuda, and he says, "Be'eten lecha machloket." No. In the I will give to you, it's in the case of the defendant that they have an argument. So I need another color to make it clear, but I'll do it in green. Okay? So according to Rav Yochanan, okay, and according to Rav Yochanan, where's the argument? The argument is be'eten lecha, in the defendant. Okay? And I'll go like this. You actually don't need that because it's yachzor in both cases. So I'll give myself a little more room here. All right? And Rav Yochanan says, be'eten lecha machloket. That's all he says. He says that it is defendant yachzor. Okay, Rabbi Yehuda says they only argue about the plaintiff. And Rabbi Yochanan says they argue about the defendant. What does Rabbi Yochanan not tell us? See, Rabbi Yehuda came and told us that they're arguing about the plaintiff, and then he told us how it stands, which I confused for a moment, but that it is, Rabbi Meir says the plaintiff and the defendant are yachzor. It's okay, but the sages said that the plaintiff is lo yachzor and the defendant is yachzor. Okay? So that's Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yochanan says, no, they're not arguing about the plaintiff, they're arguing about the defendant. That's where they differ. But Rabbi Yochanan doesn't tell us how they differ. He doesn't tell us what this agreement is. He says they agree with the plaintiff, but he doesn't say do they agree lo yachzor, do they agree yachzor with the plaintiff, right? He says the defendant is where they differ. With the plaintiff they agree, but we don't know how they agree. He hasn't said that for us. He hasn't spelled it all the way out for us. Okay? So the Gemara is going to try and deal with that. So Ibayalaho, so they said to him, Be'eten lecha machloket. Okay, Rabbi Yochanan. In the case of the defendant, there's an argument. Aval b'machol lecha divrei hakol ein yachol lachzor bo. So you're going to say, but for the plaintiff, everyone's going to agree that they don't recant? Right? That would seem to make sense. Because Rabbi Yehuda had them agreeing in the plaintiff that they can recant. So you would think that Rabbi Yochanan would be saying in the case of the plaintiff, they agree that they can't recant. Otherwise he's saying the same thing as Rabbi Yochanan, or Yehuda, right? So Rabbi Yochanan has him agreeing when it's the plaintiff, and if he's going to be different, it should be lo yachzor for both of those. And then they disagree when it's the defendant. And Rabbi Meir says he can, and sages say he can't. So that's what they say here. Let's look at it in the language. So they said to him, Be'eten lecha b'machloket, in the case of the defense, there's a disagreement, right? Aval b'machol lecha, except in the case of the plaintiff, everybody agrees, ein yachol lachzor bo, that he cannot retract, right? That seems to be the point. O dilma, or perhaps, bein bazo uvein bazo machloket, or rabbi, or perhaps Rabbi Yochanan meant they have an argument in both cases. In other words, is Rabbi Yochanan saying, be'eten lecha machloket, in the case of the defense, they're arguing. Is he saying, in the case of the defense, they are also arguing? Or is he saying, in the case of the defense, they are arguing, but in the case of the plaintiff, they're not? So is he flipping Rabbi Yehuda completely? Or is he just saying, no, Rabbi Yehuda, you've got it wrong. They're arguing in both scenarios. They disagree in both scenarios. Okay? So the Rabbi Yochanan piece there was not clear, and the Gemara comes in here and says, we're going to make this even messier. Okay?
Great.
Oh, joy.
It won't last too long, I promise. All right, so now Tashma. So we get a Tashma. Tashma is come and learn. Come and learn means that we're going to bring some other tradition between these two guys that teaches us something about them that helps us puzzle out what they disagree about. Tashma. De Amar Rava. We have a tradition from a guy named Rava who said, Machloket be'eten lecha, that the dispute is the defendant's dispute. I will give you the money. Aval b'machol lecha divrei hakol ein yachol lachzor bo. But in the case of the plaintiff allowing the father in, everybody agrees he cannot recant. So, according to this, Rava, where are we on the chart? If it is the defendant, there's a machloket, and if there is a plaintiff, everyone says lo yachzor. So it's not Rabbi Yehuda,
It's sages.
so it would be Rabbi Yochanan, right? That in the defendant, yachzor, Rabbi Yochanan says they only argued about the defendant. So defendant, yachzor, in the case of the defendant, but in the case of the plaintiff, everyone says lo yachzor. So defendant, they disagree, yachzor, lo yachzor, but in a plaintiff case, everybody is lachzor. Anyone with me? Try it again. Tashma. Rava said, the machloket, we're trying to figure out the Rabbi Yochanan piece, right?
Yeah.
Did Rabbi Yochanan flip Rabbi Yehuda, or did he say they're arguing both sides of it? They have a machloket both ways. So the Tashma comes to try and help us, and it says, in the defendant's case, it's a machloket. So if you go back to the original Mishnah, that means in the defendant bringing in an Abba, Rabbi Meir says he can recant, and the sages say he can't recant. But in Macholecha, if it's the plaintiff who allowed a father in, everybody agrees, lachzorbo, that he can, in fact, wait, ein yachol, I'm sorry. Boy, I hate it when that happens, because it really messes it up. Back it up. Tashma, Rava says, the machloket is the defendant, where the sages in the Mishnah say no, and Meir says yes. But in the case of the plaintiff, everyone acknowledges he cannot. Ein yachol lachzor bo. Ein li yachol lachzor bo. So everybody says no. In other words, Rabbi Meir acknowledges the sages in the case of a plaintiff, but in a defendant he does not. Okay? Whereas Rabbi Yehuda said in the case of the plaintiff, they disagree. And in the case of the defendant, they all acknowledge that he cannot. So this is the opposite of the original Rabbi Yehuda. Okay? So the Tashma of Rava is the opposite of Rabbi Yehuda, which is one way to understand Rabbi Yochanan. The flipping version. Okay? I amrat bishlema be'eten lecha machloket. Based on that, it's okay, logically, if you say that in the case of the eten lecha, the defendant that they are disputing, but aval b'machol lecha, divrei hakol ein yachol lachzor bo, but in the case of the plaintiff, everybody says that he cannot recant. I have a problem. Rava de Amar Karabi Yochanan. Because in that case, Rava would be exactly following our understanding of Rabbi Yochanan. Right? And the problem is that you have a tashma, and the assumption is he's going to be disagreeing with somebody. All right? So they're not happy with the fact that Rava would actually be the same as Rabbi Yochanan. Ela I amrat bein bezo uvein bezo machloket. But if you were to say that both scenarios, the plaintiff and the defendant, Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim are having a machloket, having an argument, then how could Rava Da'amar, come on? How could Rava be saying that? He doesn't agree with anybody. So you have this kind of thing where now you've lined Rava up like Rabbi Yochanan, which you didn't want because you already had Rabbi Yochanan. So they're unhappy with that. But on the other hand, they're also unhappy that he doesn't agree with anybody because he needs somebody to quote to have any authority. So they give on the second pass. Rava Tama Dinafshe Kamar. Rava is stating his own opinion. It doesn't agree with Shmuel. It doesn't agree with Yochanan. It's just Rava's out there on a limb. Now, at this point you would think, why did the Gemara do that to me? Right? Why did the Gemara bring Rava if it's just an outside opinion that doesn't agree with Rabbi Yehuda's quoting of Shmuel, doesn't agree with Rabbi Yochanan's argument with Rabbi Yehuda, and it turns everything on its head? And the reason is because we actually have a Baraita that has Rava being quoted along these lines. And now it's going to bring that, right, and this is what it's really been driving at, okay?
So say, you're only talking about the,
Abba.
yeah, but on the oath, it's the oath, there's an oath taken on this that, of my life, right? Because you're not talking
That's
about
over here.
the lesser.
That's the Seifa of the Mishnah. The oath on my life is the lesser oath.
Oh, that's a lesser oath?
Yeah, the oath by God's name
Oh,
is the
that's-
greater
oh,
oath.
yeah, so God's name is more than my
Co-
life.
Correct.
I was-
Okay?
the lesser oath.
All right? So you have allowed the leniency of a father in the Reisha of the Mishnah. You allow the leniency of this lesser oath in the Seifa of the Mishnah. Rava is now actually a tradition over here, which the Stam of the Gemara brought in here to mess with us. But it's really going to be talking about oaths. All right, so here we go. The Gemara questions Rava's view. Eitzve Rav Acha bar Tachlifa LaRava. So Rav Acha bar Tachlifa challenges Rava on the Seif of the Mishnah. Hayach chayav lechavero shavua, va'amar lo dorli b'chayai roshecha. A litigant is under obligation to swear to his fellow, and the latter said, swear to me by the life of your head. Rabbi Meir Omer Yachol Lachzor. Rabbi Meir says he can reverse, and Chachamim Omrim Ein Yachol Lachzor. That's just quoting the Mishnah. My love, I'm on 24b1. We've made it to the back of page 24. My love be'otan hanishba'im ve'lo mishalmim. Does the Mishnah not refer to those who swear and then do not pay? Remember, I told you there's two versions of oaths. Sometimes you take an oath and pay. Sometimes you take an oath and you are exempt from paying, depending on the particulars of the case. So now it's going to say, isn't this question about the oath talking about the person who takes an oath and does not pay? Who's that? Plaintiff or defendant?
Defendant.
Defendant. So it's saying, isn't the Seif of the Mishnah a defendant scenario? And you can see what's going to happen, right? Because now we've still got hanging out there Rabbi Yehuda for Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan, plaintiff, defendant, arguing with each other, not arguing each other, and Rava coming and trying to flip the Rabbi Yochanan understanding in the case of plaintiff and defendant, arguing and not arguing, but changing where they're agreeing. Okay, so all that's still in the air, and now we're going to move to the Seifa of the Mishnah, but with slightly better sources. Because, all right? So, isn't this about the case of those who swear and don't pay? In other words, a defendant. De havale b'macholecha, but, because, and let's read the notes. A waiver of the court-imposed oath in these cases is analogous to a plaintiff telling the defendant the debt is forgiven to you if the judge decides in your favor. For in both cases, the plaintiff releases the defendant from payment. Thus, it is clear that Rabbi Meir rules that the plaintiff may rescind his agreement, even in this case, contrary to Rava. Is that the question? So, okay. Law. The answer is no. Be'otan hanishba'in v'notlin. It is for those who swear and collect. So you have those who can swear and then collect the debt. So there's the scenario where the plaintiff can swear the oath, and the guy's got to pay him. They have places where the defendant swears the oath, and he doesn't have to pay. So the first question is this machloket in the Seifa for Rava about the defendant swearing and being released, or is it about the plaintiff swearing and getting paid? Okay?
And I'm still confused about why the plaintiff can't recant and just forgive the debt from the beginning, and suddenly we're saying you can't do it.
The plaintiff can forgive the debt anytime he wants. What he's doing is he's saying, I'm going to allow this questionable beit din, with the understanding that mecholecha, I will forgive the debt even if the questionable beit din rules against me. Not that I'm forgiving it, but I'm going to accept the ruling of the court forcing me to forgive it.
Okay.
Right? It's using the word I forgive because I had the power of the court not to accept this beit din. So I might have been able to enforce collection. But I'm not going to go down that route. I'm not going to go enforce collections if this level. Think about this as, it's almost by accepting an Abba onto the court, you almost turn the court into a a lesser dispute resolution, right? It's almost as if you're going to mediation. And you still have the ability to leave mediation and go to the courts? Or have you waived your right to go to the real courts? This is almost becoming mediation. I acknowledge that I will forgive you the debt if this mediation, not so kosher Beit Din, rules against me. Right?
You're not, like in our court system, you wouldn't be able to go to the next level of court. You're saying whatever this court.
According
says,
to anyone who says lo
it
yachzor,
says I
that
can't
is
go-
correct.
You can't go to the higher court.
Lo yachzor
Whatever
means
this
you
court
can't go
says,
to,
higher court.
correct. Lo yachzor means you can't go to a higher court. Yachzor means you can. You have not accepted binding arbitration, you've only accepted arbitration.
But is it a higher court or just a?
It's a bad analogy. We're using an analogy to the American court system to better understand it. There's no such thing as a higher court. It would be nullifying the court completely and establishing a court of the same level.
Because we could only have 3 people. It's
Right.
like you go to the Sanhedrin of 70. It's just all 3, always 3, or else you have a new court.
Yes, in monetary issues.
Yes, oh,
In
yeah.
capital crimes, you have higher courts.
Okay, yeah. I'm just saying.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, here we go. So, the Gemara says no, according to Rava, ba'otan hanishba'im v'notlim, that this is not about the defendant swearing and getting off, this is about the plaintiff swearing and collecting. Dahavale be'eten lecha, all right, so we're going to read this and flesh it out. According to Rava, ba'otan hanishba'im v'notlim, the Mishnah refers to those litigants who swear and thereby collect payment from their defendants. This type of case parallels one in which the defendant claims to the plaintiff, I will give you money, and claim if the court finds you, for you, because in each case the litigant agrees to pay his opponent if a certain condition is met. Only in such cases does Rabbi Meir allow the litigant to retract his agreement. Okay. Essentially, then, the two cases are the same, and therefore the Gemara says, V'hatana le reisha. But the first clause in the Mishnah already taught this dispute in connection with the acceptance of ineligible judges. Why is it necessary to reiterate in the case of the oath? In other words, you have the Reisha, you also had the Mishnah from the beginning of the chapter that already hashed all that out. We don't learn anything new by raising oaths if that's the actual interpretation. So, since there's a new case, it has to be teaching something new. So the Gemara answers, Tana tole b'da'at acharim. The Mishnah is taught regarding the oaths in a dispute where the defendant makes his payment dependent on the decision of others. Okay. V'tana tole b'da'at atzmo, and also taught where the defendant makes payment dependent upon the decision of the plaintiff himself. Utsricha. Okay. So you might, so this idea of I'm obligating myself to accept this court, and I'm accepting the court as a third party, those are two different maneuvers. Right? I'm allowing him to sit on the Beit Din and have power over me, but I'm also exempting my own power to enforce in a different system. Right? So he's saying there's actually two subtle differences in what the person is doing. And now we're going to get a tzricha. Right? So you didn't see this because you weren't with us last month. Tzricha has happened now 3 times in this chapter already, where we have a structure, where you say, why did I need this additional teaching? Isn't it redundant? If it's redundant, then I must have misunderstood something, because nothing is supposed to be redundant. And the answer is it's not redundant because there's 2 potential scenarios. And if I only had one or the other of the 2 teachings, I would only have learned the proper halacha in one or the other of the 2 cases. And therefore, I need both, because if I knew the one, it would have taught me the right thing here and the wrong thing there. But if I knew the other, it would have taught me the right thing there and the wrong thing here. Therefore, I have both of them to teach me the right thing here and the right thing there. It's a logic box. It's a 4-corner logic box. My kids are doing SATs, so that's what I'm seeing logic boxes and everything. Okay, Tana tole b'da'at achrim. Okay. So you're going to have the word sricha and the word sricha, and the proof of the 2 sides of why you need each will run in between the 2 words sricha. So here's the first one. Utsricha, it was necessary in both cases. De'itana tole b'da'at achrim, if the Mishnah only taught the dispute in the case where he makes payment dependent on the decision of others, Be'haka'amar Rabbi Meir dematze hadarbe. I might have only said that Rabbi Meir allows him to retract in that case. Mishum de la gamar umakne. Because he never conclusively resolved to give him the money. So you could say, I would think that Rabbi Meir thinks that the guy never really knew he was going to have to give the money. He thought he was just playing it out by letting the judge on, but he knew he could recant. Right? So he never had himself in the game fully. He wasn't committed to it. So, and that's why Rabbi Meir would allow it. Amar mi yemar de mizakele, for he would have said to himself, who's to say the judge won't go in my favor or his favor? And thus the agreement was not made in earnest, but in the hope that it would not work against him. Aval, tole b'dat atzmo, but in the case where he is committing himself to the outcome of the case, okay, which is the oath. So in the case of allowing an Abba, there'd be a machloket. But in the case of the oath, he knows he can't get out of it because he's obligated himself. So the first half of the Srika is, I have a Reish and a Seif in the Mishnah. I have an Abba and I have an oath. If I only had one, right, and it was the Abba, there might be an argument for Rabbi Meir to allow it because the guy was never invested in the outcome. He just allowed the Abba to see how it would go, but he knew he could reject it. But in the oath case, where he was part of swearing an oath, he would never think he could then get out of the oath. Right? That's the first half of the Srika. That's why you need, for Rabbi Meir, this side and this side to teach the two, because otherwise you can come to a wrong conclusion. Ema modeh laho l'Rabbanan. You might have said that Rabbi Meir would admit to the rabbis in the case of an oath where the guy was invested in the outcome because he already committed to it, that he would not retract, and he can acknowledge to the rabbis that he cannot retract. You would have wrongly come to that conclusion. That's what Sricha says. Okay? And now the other side, ve'i ashma'in and baha, and if it only informed us of the dispute in the second case where the defendant makes his payment subject to the plaintiff's decision to swear, Bahaka Amri Rabbanan, I would have said perhaps of the rabbis that in this case, the rabbis maintain that the defendant may not retract since his agreement was made with the knowledge that it would probably work against him. Aval Bahahi, in the other case with the father, which was unpredictable, Ema Moduluhu Rabbanan Rabbi Meir, the rabbis would have thought the rabbis might acknowledge to Rabbi Meir that they're not, the plaintiff and the defendant are not fully invested, and in that case they're just rolling the dice to see what will happen. And they would have said that you can still recant because it's not a complete commitment to the process of the court. Utsricha. And that's why you need both cases. So the first sricha is that if you had the father case and not the oath case, you might understand that that's why Rabbi Meir allows the retraction. But he wouldn't allow a retraction in the case of the oath. On the contrary, if you had the oath case and not the Abba case, you might have thought that in the Abba case, they would have agreed that everybody can retract. So you need both cases for the rabbis and Rabbi Meir to have an argument on both cases. Right?
Okay, that makes sense.
All right. They've gotten away from the question of whether it's the defendant or the plaintiff, and they've thankfully dumped the Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yochanan thing. They brought back Rav Ava just to clarify the case of the oath making. And they didn't push it as far as they could have, for which I am profoundly grateful. Okay, the Mishnah. All right, the Mishnah was not, we're at 1 o'clock. Let's see what we've got. It's a shame not to get to the Mishnah. Let's see what we can do. Amar Reish Lakish. So Reish Lakish says, Machloket lifnei gemar din. He says this whole thing is between Rabbi Meir and Chachamim, doesn't have to do with plaintiff, doesn't have to do with defendant, doesn't have to do with the difference between the oath or the father. It doesn't have to do with whatever it has to do with. It has to do with before the judgment of the court has been reached. Lifnei gamar din. There's been, right? You can retract, but not once the gavel comes down. Okay? Aval la'achar gamar beit din divrei hakol ein yachol lachzor bo. Everybody agrees. Rabbi Meir would acknowledge to the Chachamim after the verdict has been reached, you cannot then invalidate the judge just because he's your father and you let him on the court. I can't believe my dad just ruled against me. Right? Tough nookies. Okay? But Rabbi Yochanan, here he is, Amar, la'achar gemar din machloket. Rabbi Yochanan says, according to Reish Lakish, that it's after the gavel has come down that they're arguing. Okay? The Gemara now is going to look at this Rabbi Yochanan view that Reish Lakish has quoted. Ibaya laho, they inquired of him, la'achar gemar beit din machloket aval lifnei gemar din divrei hakol yachol lachzor ba'o. So when Rabbi Yochanan says it's after there's a machloket, again, is he saying after there's a machloket and before there's a machloket? Or is he saying after there's a machloket and before there's not a machloket? Which is Rabbi Yochanan saying? Did Rabbi Yochanan say the dispute is only whether the litigant may retract after the verdict, but before the verdict was handed down, they all agree he may retract? Oh, Dilma, bein bezo ubein bezo machloket. Or is Rabbi Yochanan saying, in fact, that they have an argument before and after the thing comes down? Same structure. Here comes a tashma. Come and learn a proof to Amar Rava in the name of Rava. Kibel alav karov o pasul. If somebody has accepted upon himself a judge who is a relative or ineligible as a witness, as a judge, lifnei gemar din yachol lachzor, he can still have that judge removed before the verdict has been read. La'achar gemar beit din ein yachol lachzor, but after he may not retract. I amrat bishlem la'achar beit din gemar din. It's okay if you say that it is after the gemar of the din, the gavel comes down, that he cannot, after the beit din, machloket, that's where they disagree. Aval lifnei gemar din divrei hakol yachol lachzor bo. It's okay if you say that after the verdict they're disagreeing, but everybody agrees before the verdict that that he may in fact retract. So let's try and clean that up. We have a teaching from Rava that says Yochanan, that asks for Yochanan, does he believe that the argument is only after the verdict, or can there be an argument before and after the verdict? The first answer to that is a tashma, and it goes like this. It's okay if you say that it's after the verdict, but before, and that they disagree, but before the verdict everybody says he can retract, because Rava, why is that okay? Because Rava da Amar ka Rabbi Yochanan alibet da Rabbanan, because Rava's ruling matches Rabbi Yochanan, which follows the rabbi's opinions, which we saw in a messier form a half a page ago. Ella I amrat bein bezo machloket. But if you were to try and claim that Rabbi Yochanan's teaching about the machloket means there's a machloket after and a machloket before, Rava da Amar kaman. On what basis could Rava have such a ruling? So we saw that before as well. Ella lav shma minat la'achar gemar din machloket. Rather, we learn from this logic that the dispute is only after the verdict. Shma minat. So we learn this. That's the conclusion. So at the end of the day, they've come to the conclusion that the machloket about removing a judge only happens after the verdict has been reached.
So I have a question. If the judge is removed, do they have to have a third judge that?
The two judges find a third judge again.
Again, so, okay. And then does that mean they would re-examine the verdict? Or they just keep going?
They would start the case all over again. There was a discussion in the last Mishnah that perhaps you have thrown the entire Beit Din out and you have to get a new Beit Din. Right? That's not what this seems to be saying here. It's just replacing the one judge.
Then they have to start from scratch? Or?
You guys got 5 minutes? You want to finish the section?
Sure.
Okay. A definitive ruling is sought. Okay. Shlach le Rav Nachman bar Rav Chisda le Rav Nachman bar Yaakov. This is a very late ruling. This is coming towards the end of the Talmudic process, which is what we would expect at the end of a chapter. Yilamdeinu Rabbeinu lifnei gemar din machloket o la'achar gemar din machloket. We have learned from our rabbis the following final exam question for this topic in the law, which was, we were asked, is this machloket after the ruling or before the ruling? Okay? The halacha kedivrei mi, and whose halacha does it follow? So this was the final exam question that we received from our rabbis. This level of rabbis is like 100, 200 years after the previous paragraph. So they say, we've received from our rabbis the following challenge question. Is this Mishnah before or after the gavel, and who does it accord with? Right? It's a final exam question. Shalach le, Nachman bar Yaakov sent back to him, Lachar gemar din machloket, v'halacha kedivrei chachamim. And he ruled very simply that the machloket between Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim is only after the gavel has come down, and the halacha follows the sages, which is lo yachzor. Okay? So everybody agrees before Beit Din that he can be choser, and after the gavel comes down, Rabbi Meir was overruled, and the actual halacha is lo yachzor, according to Chachamim. Okay? Now Rav Ashi Amar, so Rav Ashi, who's a very late rabbi, comes in with this ruling and says, Haki shlach le, could he possibly have ruled such? Ve'eten lecha b'machloket, o b'machol lecha b'machloket. And he brings in the question of, wait a minute, there was this whole thing about if it's the plaintiff or if it's the defendant, and that's where they disagreed. What happened to all of that, Rav Ashi asks. V'halacha k'divrei mi. So Rav Ashi says, I've got a better final exam question. Forget the before, the after the gavel, defendant or plaintiff, and who does the halacha accord with? And the answer is, shlach le, they sent back to him the answer, be'eten lecha machloket, in the case of the defendant, it's a disagreement, v'halacha k'divrei chachamim, and the sages get the halacha. Okay?
Which is lo yachzor.
However, besura matnei hachi, in the yeshiva in Surah, they taught this way, which we just told you, Rav Ashi, but you should know, Pumbedita matnei hachi. But in the rival yeshiva in the same town, in Pumbedita, they teach Amar Rabbi Chanina bar Shlemya. Rabbi Chanina said in the name of Shlemya, Shalchule mibe Rav l'Shmuel. They sent a question from Rav to Shmuel. Yilamdenu Rabbeinu lifnei gamar din v'kanu miyado mai. They asked a question, instruct us the halacha, if it's before the verdict and they had performed a kinyan with him not to retract, so they did a ceremony not to retract, then what is the law? And shlach laho ein lachar kinyam klum. And he responded, you can't obligate yourself with any kind of a kinyan before the case has been heard. It doesn't work. So that's just another little thing they threw in at the end about so now that you have this chachamim is the rule, and it's after the gavel comes down, the question is, so before the gavel comes down, can I obligate myself to? And the answer is no.
What is kinyan?
A kinyan is when you acquire the terms of an agreement. So when the bridegroom accepts the terms of the ketubah, he pulls on a little kerchief, and it's a kinyan. He acquires the terms of the ketubah. When I buy your chametz from you at Passover, I pull on a little kerchief, and I acquire the rights over your chametz. Kinyan is when you acquire the obligations, rights, privileges of some financial arrangement.
Always financial?
Well, the ketubah is financial, but there's love involved.
You would hope.
Okay, that's it. We're going to pick up a new Mishnah. The next Mishnah is the best one in the chapter. Whether dice players and gamblers can testify in court.
They can make a kinyan or they can't make?
If they make a kinyan, they cannot
They can-
enforce it.